At some point, everything falls apart. And when it does, when life strips you of what you thought was solid, when the identity you built crumbles, when the success you clung to turns hollow, there's a moment of silence. A moment where the noise stops, and all you're left with is yourself. Raw, exposed, shaken. That's the moment Alan Watts speaks to. Not as punishment, not as divine revenge, but as an act of radical, sometimes brutal love. Because according to Watts, this collapse isn't meant to destroy you. It's meant to rebuild you, but not the version of you the world convinced you to become. Not the ego-centered self stitched together from performance, approval, fear, and control. If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Your feedback helps shape what we cover next, and you being here keeps the conversation going. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. No, this breaking is designed to reveal what was there all along, your true self, rooted in something far deeper than anything surface level. And it doesn't happen gently. Divine love doesn't always whisper in soft tones. Sometimes, it arrives like a storm. It tears through the structures you spent years building, shatters the mirrors that kept you tied to false identities, and leaves you standing in the rubble, wondering what just happened. This is where the transformation begins. Watts doesn't offer a fairy tale about healing or personal development. He delivers something far more honest. Pain as sacred, collapse as necessary, loss as grace. Because without the breaking, the old identities won't fall away. And as long as you're clinging to who you think you are, there's no space for who you actually are to come forward. The masks have to fall. The illusions built on fear, shame, control, they have to go. That's not cruelty. That's clarity. And clarity, in the truest sense, is often painful before it's liberating. That's the real question. And it can't be answered until the breaking happens. This isn't a self-help moment. It's a sacred dismantling. The divine doesn't work to preserve your comfort. It works to reveal your truth. And that truth often lives beneath the surface of a lot of noise. False narratives, ego-driven ambition, survival mechanisms you inherited but never examined. The breaking tears, all of it, down. Because the breaking is not the end. It's the fire before the rebirth. Watts compares this process to symbols that speak for themselves. The phoenix doesn't fly without first burning. The snake doesn't grow without shedding. The seed doesn't become a tree without splitting open. That pain, that tearing, it's not chaos. It's transformation. But it doesn't look glamorous while it's happening. It looks like loss. It looks like everything you thought was real slipping through your hands. It looks like confusion, exhaustion, sometimes silence so thick it's deafening. But in that silence, in that stripped-down space, something extraordinary happens. You start hearing the truth. Not the external noise of who you're supposed to be, but the internal signal of who you are. You don't come back the same. You don't come back with a polished identity. You come back rooted, anchored, less reactive, more real. That's the gift hidden in the storm. Not just resilience, not just survival, but emergence. You don't get rebuilt to become shiny or successful or impressive. You get rebuilt to become true. The version of you that doesn't need masks or applause or certainty to feel whole. Because that version of you, it was always there. The breaking just cleared the path. It's easy to miss that when you're in the middle of it. When things are falling apart, you don't feel enlightened, you feel lost. Watts never denies that. He doesn't romanticize the collapse. He names it for what it is. Uncomfortable, disorienting, sometimes violent. But he also reframes it. This isn't cruelty. This is divine architecture at work. Every breakdown clears out what doesn't serve you. Every storm is a surgical removal of the illusions that were keeping you small, afraid, fragmented. Divine love, Watts says, isn't here to coddle you. It's here to free you. And freedom always costs something. Usually, it costs whatever was keeping you trapped. So the process isn't clean. It's messy. It's holy. You lose what doesn't belong to you. You shed what never defined you. You stop chasing what can't complete you. And in that emptiness, something sacred begins to form. Not overnight. Not with fireworks. But quietly. Slowly. In the silence after the storm, that's where you start to feel it real strength. Not the loud, forced kind that masks insecurity, but quiet strength. Grounded, rooted, unshakable. Watts speaks directly to that shift. He says that divine love reveals itself in stillness, in simplicity, in clarity. After the fire, after the collapse, what's left is clean. And in that space, you meet yourself, your actual self. Not the one you curated, but the one that was always aligned with purpose, with love, with the divine. If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Your feedback helps shape what we cover next, and you being here keeps the conversation going. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. That's why the breaking matters. It's not just about learning resilience. It's about revealing essence. You're not being punished. You're being purified. You're not being destroyed. You're being delivered. Watts doesn't promise a happy ending, but he does offer a deeper truth, that the breaking leads to freedom, and that freedom is what allows you to stop surviving and start living aligned, grounded, and whole. If you're going through something that feels like collapse, this message is for you. Not to fix it, but to recognize it. This might be the fire, but it's not the end. But not right away. First comes the undoing, and not the kind that happens on your terms. The kind that rips through without warning. The kind that leaves you sitting in silence, with nothing left to hold on to but breath. Alan Watts doesn't dress this up. He doesn't hand you a soft version of spiritual growth. What he gives you is the truth, transformations and pretty. It's not always soothing. Sometimes it's disruptive. Sometimes it's violent. Not in a physical sense, but in the way it hits the soul, forceful, necessary, and irreversible. Because the divine, according to Watts, isn't trying to make you comfortable. It's trying to make you real. The breaking, that collapse we spend so much time trying to avoid, is the only way to burn away everything that doesn't belong to us. The illusions we've collected, the stories we've lived through, the roles we've played to survive, they all have to go. And it feels like loss. It feels like failure, but it's actually mercy. Watts challenges the idea that love, especially divine love, is always gentle. He says real love, the kind that frees you, sometimes shows up as destruction, as storm, as fire, because real love doesn't always preserve. Sometimes it pries. It pries your fingers off the ledges you've been clinging to. It breaks the illusions that kept you numb. It forces you out of identities that were never yours to begin with. And in the process, you become empty. Not broken, but stripped. You feel the rawness of standing in the ruins of what you thought your life was. And in that quiet aftermath, when all the distractions are gone, you're finally in a position to see what's true. The pain? That was the doorway. The silence after the loss? That's where the clarity lives. It's not a punishment. It's not karma. It's not bad luck. It's intervention. It's something higher cutting in and saying, no more pretending. You're not here to perform. You're here to become. And becoming doesn't happen when everything is stable. Becoming happens when everything comes undone. That's the paradox Watts sits in. That pain, the kind that disorients you, that guts you, is the most honest tool the divine has for shaping who you really are. Not the role you were assigned. Not the version of yourself you crafted to be acceptable, or successful, or safe. The you underneath all of that. The breaking is what lets that self out. Because before it happens, most of us are just surviving. We're performing stability, building lives around control, constructing identities based on approval. It looks solid, but it's not. And when the cracks start to show, we panic. But those cracks, that's the real invitation. Watts compares it to shedding skin, or burning off the layers that were never really you. He points out that it doesn't feel empowering in the moment, it feels like death. Because in some ways, it is. It's the death of the false self, the ego, the mask, the fear-based structures you built to cope. They all go. Because they have to. If you're going to live free, you can't live fake. And that freedom isn't loud. It doesn't arrive with a dramatic declaration. It shows up in the silence after the storm, when everything unnecessary is gone and you're standing in the ruins, strangely calm, clear, present. Not because the world around you is fixed, but because something in you is. That's the shift Watts points to. That moment after the pain, when you're no longer clinging to identity, when you're no longer seeking external validation to tell you who you are, when you're no longer trying to force life into a mold that was never meant to hold it. You've surrendered, but not in defeat. In truth, surrender, as Watts frames it, isn't giving up, it's giving into what's real. It's stepping out of the illusion of control. It's saying, I don't know what comes next, but I'm here, I'm awake, and I'm done pretending. And once you're there, once you've stopped resisting the process, you begin to rise. Not because you're trying to, because there's nothing left holding you down. The pain that cracked you open, it didn't end you. It introduced you to yourself. You realized that what you lost was never yours. What you feared losing was never essential. And the life that's now emerging isn't about chasing perfection, it's about being whole. That's why the divine allows the breaking, not to punish, to purify, to show you that strength doesn't come from building walls or collecting achievements. It comes from standing in your truth naked, flawed, alive, and knowing that's enough. That's where real freedom lives. Not in certainty, not in having it all together, but in authenticity, in being so aligned with your truth that you don't need to perform anymore. You don't need to explain. You don't need to win approval. You've already come home to yourself. Watts is clear on this. The fire doesn't just destroy, it refines. It burns away the shallow parts of you that were never sustainable. It leaves behind something unshakable, your essence, your divine blueprint, the part of you that was always whole even before the collapse. And once you've been through that, you carry yourself differently, not with arrogance, with quiet strength, the kind that doesn't need to prove anything, the kind that listens more than it speaks, the kind that stands firm, because it has answers, but because it's no longer afraid of the questions. That's what the breaking leads to. Not a bigger ego, not a shinier version of your former self, but a deeper connection to what's real. And when you find that, you don't go back. You can't. Because once you've been broken by love, real love, you realize it was never here to coddle you. It was here to wake you up. And waking up, that's the whole point. If you felt like everything is falling apart, if you've been in the storm, the silence, the fire, this is the reminder you didn't know you needed. You're not being punished. You're being invited. You're not being destroyed. You're being made new. Let the old go. Let the pain speak. Let the illusion burn. What comes after will be you, not the one the world trained you to be, but the one you've always been underneath it all. The storm ends. The fire fades. And what's left standing is real. There's a moment that happens after the breaking. It doesn't come with fanfare. There's no applause. No lightning bolt from the sky. It's quiet. Still. Almost unnoticeable unless you've been emptied first. That moment is when you stop trying to put the old pieces back together. Not because you've given up, but because, finally, you understand, you were never supposed to go back to who you were before. Alan Watts doesn't hand you a story about going back to normal. He doesn't offer healing that leads you right back to your comfort zone. What he describes is something far more honest and far more sacred. You don't return, you become, and you only become after everything false has been stripped away by force, by love, or both. That's how the soul works. It doesn't evolve by clinging to who it was. It evolves by surrendering to who it's meant to be. And that surrender, that's not a weakness. It's not defeat. It's the highest form of alignment. Because only when the illusion of control is gone do you start to listen to life, to spirit, to yourself. Watts puts it plainly. The illusion of control is the barrier between you and your divine identity. And pain, specifically the pain of collapse, is what cracks it open. Not because life is cruel, but because you were never meant to live inside that illusion forever. You were meant to wake up. And waking up isn't just about spiritual concepts or poetic metaphors. It's about facing what's real. It's about standing in the ashes of what you built, admitting that maybe it was never solid, and finally asking, what now? That question is where the transformation begins. Watts draws a clear line between suffering and purification. Not all suffering is meaningful, but when it leads to clarity, to awakening, to freedom, it becomes sacred. Not because the pain itself is holy, but because of what it reveals. And here's what it reveals, that so much of what we thought made us strong was actually what kept us small. The striving, the proving, the performing, the chasing, it all looks like power until it breaks. And when it breaks, what's left isn't weakness, it's truth. The ego doesn't survive that kind of fire. Neither do the stories you were taught to believe about who you need to be in order to be loved, respected, or safe. And thank God they don't. Because once those things fall away, you begin to meet yourself for the first time. Not the polished, filtered version, but the version that's been through fire and stopped pretending. That version doesn't hustle for worthiness. That version doesn't cling to the illusion of safety. That version lives in alignment. And it's not loud. It doesn't need to be. Watts describes this part of the journey not as a triumphant rise, but as a quiet return to your divine design, to the strength that was buried under the noise, to the clarity that was drowned out by ego. You don't have to be flashy when you're real. The world might not even notice when you start living from that space. But you'll notice. Everything inside you changes. Your pace, your posture, your presence. You stop reacting. You stop explaining. You stop reaching outside yourself for validation that can only come from within. You begin to live from the inside out, not the other way around. And here's what makes that shift so powerful. It doesn't require external change. You don't have to run away, reinvent, or escape your life. You just have to stop clinging to what was never true. You stop chasing success defined by other people. You stop fearing loss like it's the worst thing that could happen. You stop needing certainty in order to move forward. You shed. Watts often returned to this metaphor of shedding, of letting go. He compared it to natural processes: snakes losing their skin, trees dropping their leaves, butterflies breaking out of cocoons. None of those processes are optional. They're necessary and painful. The shedding hurts, not because it's unnatural, but because we resist it. We hold on to the old layer long after it's become too tight, too heavy, too false. And when it finally breaks away, when life tears it off for us, we feel naked, unprotected. But what we don't realize in that moment is that we're free. That's the divine paradox. What feels like loss is often gain in disguise. What looks like the end is actually the beginning. What feels like devastation is grace, unrecognizable, but exact. That's why Watts doesn't ask you to avoid the fire. He asks you to go through it fully, without pretending it's not burning, without numbing it, without trying to fix it too quickly. Because on the other side, when the flames have done their work, you're left with something pure, something untouchable, the divine self. Not the self that's measured by achievements, or likes, or status, or image. The self that existed before all of that. The one that can't be shaken because it's rooted in something eternal. When you find that self, you don't become perfect. You become present. You stop living in fear of loss. You stop scrambling to prove your worth. You stop fighting life at every turn, because you've already died once, and come back stronger, not louder, not flashier, but clearer, realer, truer. That's the strength. Watts speaks of the strength that lives in stillness, in presence, in quiet resilience. It doesn't need to perform because it knows. If this resonates, if it feels like a mirror to your journey, to your collapse, to your quiet rebirth, don't keep it to yourself. Like this video. Share it with someone who's sitting in their own ashes. Leave a comment about what the fire burned away and what it gave you in return. And if you're ready to keep walking this path, subscribe. Because this isn't the end of your story. It's the page where everything changes.